Hello, my name is Mersha Stonegata of Whittam. I'm from Ontier and I hold the membership in the Order of the Pelican. I'm also a persona nerd in Anglo Saxon stuff. And almost when you start going to persona, you have to start going to food. And so this is the result of a certain amount of research over the last 25 or so years. Most recently, a number of fairly new books have come out on the subject. None of them as good, as comprehensive as Anne Hagen's, but definitely have a lot of new information. So I'm going to start this by telling you that this field is exploding and it's difficult for non-specialists like us to keep up with it. So give yourself a couple of grains of salt if you find that you're having difficulty understanding stuff. There's some stuff available on the internet. It would be an entire new class to talk about how to evaluate that. But a good rule of thumb is if it's a university um, presentation, or if it's from somebody that has a PhD in the field, not just a PhD, it's probably trustable. You can start getting into online journals and such like that through your probably local library, or you may have to travel to get to another library. Some libraries offer journals that cost a lot of money online. And if you really get into it, having access to those journals can be amazing because you're getting stuff that's probably 2 to 5 years ahead of books. So uh, it is not difficult to document foodstuffs in Anglo-Saxon England. We have pollen studies, we've got stuff that's come out of pots, we have pictures, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. The difficulty is documenting meals, cooking techniques, using the food under most circumstances, except perhaps boiled stuff that's been found in pots, bones, and so on like that. And certainly things that are served together in meals can be very difficult. We've got some stomach contents, especially in bog bodies. That's not helpful because those could be ceremonial. Who knows? So the handout that you guys should have access to, Christina, maybe, uh, has the result of my gleaning. Please don't hesitate to use that. Please cite me if you don't mind doing that. And give it a fairly small hunk of salt, but a good hunk of salt because the older it gets, again, potentially the less accurate it will get.
Yep, I do not see it in the Google Drive.
Can I attach it? Let me try. I'll send you a message
Okay.
and I will attach it to my computer. This shouldn't take long.
They just had me upload the recording from my class, so you can always do it afterwards if you can't make it happen
Right.
during.
Anglo's daily life. Come on. Here we are. It's called Food from Daily Life Draft because I haven't changed the name. You guys are welcome to open that up. I just attached it and take a look especially if my talking is boring. You're very welcome to read it and then ask questions as a result. You're also welcome to ask me questions. One reason why this is a 2-hour class is I'm hoping we're going to get a lot of discussion. I love discussion. Okay. So
I don't see the link in the chat. Is there anywhere that somebody could put that link there?
I just put it on the bottom. Oh, I'm in the wrong chat. Hit me hard. Now I need to find how to get to the chat. Anybody can help me with that?
It should
Down at the
be.
bottom. Oh, there we are.
Yeah.
And get back to chat. There we are. I'm on the wrong chat. I'm going to turn this chat off. I'm going to go to this chat, maybe. No, it won't let me out of the previous chat I was in.
You might be able to just drop down the menu that says potentially either to everyone or to either to everyone in meeting or to the channel. Or if you send it just to me, I will upload it to the Google Drive and link it to the Google Drive.
Okay. You're Christiana, right?
I am Christina O'Cleary.
Okay.
Yes, some of us don't know how to get to the Google Drive, so a link.
Yes.
Okay, Christina, I just sent it to you, maybe.
Yes.
Thank you so much.
If the chat was this same room, I think it just has the old chat and it just continues on at the bottom.
Yeah.
It didn't make a new chat for a new session.
That's handy. Well, I just posted it to Christiana. I will post it again to everyone.
I
And
don't-
hopefully that will make
There
everyone.
are two of us here, and this was the confusion with who was the moderator. I'm Christiana. I'm not seeing it sending to me either.
There's a link to the
Okay,
Google
Christina
Doc.
got it. Okay, there we go.
I also just send it to everyone. So maybe that will help. So
Yep.
let's get going. And then you tell me if you're having any trouble finding it and tell me what to do. So there are no recipe books for Anglo-Saxon England or really much of our interior early period. The earliest stuff we have is Apicius, of course, which is sort of middle to late Roman. There were Apician manuscripts available, as far as we know, in Anglo-Saxon England, at least around the 9th century. So it's possible that those were read. We have no way of knowing. You need someone who was literate in Latin, who was also interested in instructing someone how to cook, or perhaps was a cook. Possible. We have Anathemas, which is kind of early Anglo-Saxon, early to middle. It's Frankish. It's Latin. Again, you need someone who is literate in Latin and available. And then we have for the actual Anglo-Saxons something that people aren't calling a recipe book, which is oftentimes called the Leechdoms, which is a medicine book. But there is some food types of recipes in there. If you have a queasy stomach, you take white bread and put it in broth and have them eat it. So we've got a couple of interesting actions there. We've got the making of white bread. We've got the making of broth. We have those two put together. And again, the other part of it is common sense. I mean, I was fed that as a child when I wasn't feeling well. So it's a simple thing. And there's certain things that could be food in the Leechdoms, menus and so on, that are being used medicinally. So you might want to take a look at that. And if nothing else, it helps you start getting into the mindset of an Anglo-Saxon cook or someone who had access to cooking. I want you to do two things while we were talking about this in the class. And the first thing is to realize that the Anglo-Saxons basically started arriving around 300, 350 as Roman irregulars. And basically the culture semi-collapsed, but really didn't around 1086. So 20 years after William the Bastard came in and took over the country. So that's a long period of time. There would have been changes in the availability of different types of food. There's climatic changes. There's levels of wealth changes, probably cooking technique things, pottery, etc., that we don't know anything about. So when you say, was this an Anglo-Saxon meal or was this an Anglo-Saxon food? You can't answer that. And that's another reason why I'm doing the class, which is how do you deal with making Anglo-Saxon food if you have no resources to tell you how they were combined to make food? And the answer is, it's to a certain extent, to be honest, it's a guess, and by golly. Part of it is experimental archaeology. Part of it is, well, these two things don't taste good to me, so maybe they wouldn't have tasted good to Anglo-Saxons. Well, that's just dumb because there's some food that isn't an acquired taste. Let's talk about yogurt, for instance. I can't document yogurt in Anglo-Saxon England, by the way, but I can document it in countries nearby. So maybe the Anglo-Saxons had yogurt. And I will tell you that plain yogurt is definitely an acquired taste. And if you're not used to it, you're going to say, this is yucky. They never would have eaten it. Well, that's just silly. It's like lutefisk. Oh, come on. Anybody who's had lutefisk and isn't Norwegian, you're holding your nose. But the Norwegians consider it a badge of honor to eat lutefisk. So that doesn't help you any, but that gives you a scree to look over this sort of thing. The second scree is the food that we eat, every time we eat it, tells us the power level of all of the gatekeepers that were involved in that food. The farmer, the cook, the purchaser, the owner of the food, and finally you or I as the consumer. So those power levels will change based on time, money, the power of the individual, all of these sorts of things. And that also means that food flows along those gatekeepers line. And Franson, and he's in your bibliography, talks a lot about this. By the way, Franson is one of the hardest books I've ever had to read. The guy is an egotist and highly opinionated, but man, he's got some amazing insights. So if you're at sort of the middle to the upper level of interest in food, especially Anglo-Saxon food, take a look at him. And yeah, you might want to bring along a stick that you can beat the book with. Anyway, and then also those gatekeepers determine which foods are allowed and which foods are taboo. And so if you think of a taboo food, for instance, as fasting, we talk about fasting a little bit later. And also think about edible foods, those that are medicinal, those are appropriate for you. Now, as far as we can tell, the Anglo-Saxons didn't do the whole thing with, come on, with the, my brain is gone. Those things that you are supposed to eat if you are too hot, choleric and those sorts of things, that's a later invention. Well, it's much earlier, but it got later invented, more adopted in Europe, a little bit less in England. That doesn't seem to be applying at all. There was a little bit of that in the leash-ups, but it's almost in an appendix, so it's probably added on by somebody. Anyway, one great source of generalized food information, and by this I'm going to talk about nutrition, is skeletons. And they tell us that the diet was bland but sufficient. So there are cases of people who show markers for starvation in some form in their bones, but it's actually less than is commonly known. People think that everybody went through starvation periods. So if you do something like read the Anglo-Saxon Chronicles that documents apparently accurately what happened every year, they will talk about things like, yes, there was a famine in this year, or there was a murrain of cattle. That means that the cattle had a disease this year. And theoretically, you should be able to look at bones that are available in that year and find out what's going on. But those murrains and those famines were probably localized. It doesn't tell you what was going on in the whole country unless you had something like a volcanic explosion that caused a year without summer, which did happen in Anglo-Saxon England. We can document that. That's another class. The lower class diet appears to be deficient in iron in the winter and low in vitamin C in the winter, which makes sense because the irons are from meat and the vitamin C is difficult to preserve. Might be one reason why cabbage was probably a very popular and useful crop. And we know that because pollen studies show us oftentimes that there are cole crops in the area. One problem with pollen studies is it tells you it's only a cole crop. So it might have been cabbage, it might have been kale, might have been broccoli, who knows? I've also wanted to back breed all the cole crops and see what would happen, what sort of initial cole crop you could get, but I haven't done that yet. You also have to think about the fact that, again, diet changes based on economics and the culture as well as time and the locale, what's available to you in Northern England versus available to other people on a part in Southwestern England. 2 meals a day appears to have been a standard relationship, one on rising and another one in the afternoon or the evening, perhaps only one a day if you're monastic, depending on the monastic rules. Reading Anglo-Saxon monastic rules is really interesting, tells you a lot about food. That's another story. In the Old English text, the dialogue of Solomon and Saturn, and this is an example of why you don't want to just read the archaeology. You want to read the literature because there's a lot of stuff you can see between the lines, and the more of a variety of things you read, the more you start getting this ping with history, literature, and archaeology. So the dialogue of Solomon and Saturn says, in 12 months, you must give your serving man 700 loaves and 20 loaves besides morning food and afternoon food. Well, coincidentally, that's 2 loaves a day, staple ration of the common man with other foods additional. If you do the caloric analysis for a very active human being, that gets you approximately 1 loaf at 20 ounces. So this is a 7-ounce loaf of white bread. And I'm an average Anglo-Saxon woman size, so I'm 5'2". So 20-ounce loaf of bread, let's see if I can get this back in the photograph, is going to be roughly 3 times this size. That's a lot of bread. And you're eating 2 of them a day. But if this is your main caloric intake and you're doing heavy outdoor field work, that might not even be adequate. Well, it was adequate, though, because we have the bone studies to tell us that 2 loaves of bread once a day is adequate. And that doesn't mean it was the only thing that they ate, of course. There was all sorts of other things available. So let's talk about this. Now, I gave you a list of things that you could start eating if you wanted to be available, if you wanted to do it. So we're going to start with groats. Hi, groats. Let me take a look at this. And do let me know if you guys know about this. I'll quit spending so much time on what the food looks like. This is barley groats. It was cooked in the oven for about an hour, just covered with water, and it is lovely rehydrated. It's nice, it's warm. It was theoretically could be cooked in a pot just like this. Put it near the coals. You could even have cooked it the night before if you only have enough ability to have a fire once a day. You put this in your evening fire. As the coals die down and heat your hut, it also is cooking your groats. They're cold in the morning, but potentially quite available. They are bland. Ooh.
Your
Can I
virtual
also
background makes it a little difficult to see what you're holding up to the camera.
Let's see if I can change my background. Down here, view. Okay. Liar. Okay. Tell me how to change my background. I figured it out once.
you look at there is a the video icon, right, to activate your video. Next to it, there's a little arrow. If you click on that arrow, it'll give you a menu, one of which will say virtual
Video
background or something like that.
settings.
Yeah.
Video, recording. Am I down at the bottom or up at the top?
Well, it depends on, I think at the bottom. I don't know exactly, which system you're on, but
Probably at the bottom.
Yeah.
It depends on what I'm not sure.
Choose virtual background. Yay.
There you go.
Yes.
Is that better? No, that's none. That doesn't help you any.
That's what you want though. Hold your things
Yeah,
up
to
to
be
the
able to
camera.
see
None
it.
is better,
There
yeah.
you go.
Okay. Right. Yeah, you can see my library too. Okay. We are
don't have a problem
looking
with that.
at barley groats. So a groat is just basically a whole grain that has been hulled. And you could get these. I get them at my local Safeway. They're just bags of barley.
I have a quick question. So do we know from either written documents or archaeology whether they hull them, whether they
Yes,
remove the hull?
there's an enormous amount of information. And if you go to page, I didn't number my pages, but page 4 that starts appendix specific foods. Up at the top is wheat varieties, bread, wheat, emmer, etc. And barley is about halfway down. And the upper part talks about hulling versus non-hulling. So yes, it's hulled barley in period. I'm guessing when they say, okay, do we need to go in? Do people know the difference between hulled and non-hulling and all that sort of stuff? Do we need to go into that? I mean, it's fairly straightforward. The hulling comes off easily. Non-hulled takes a lot of work to get off. So yes, it was 6-row hulled barley.
Right.
We'll talk a little bit more about variations in grains over period and what the basic grains were that were available. That's one reason why I gave you a whole large number of choices, because I would suspect that they used whichever grain was available to do their porridge equivalent in the morning. The real advantage to this kind of stuff is I don't need to grind it, right? And it's perfectly available to me. And it's very easy to make. I mean, all I would have to do, again, water, barley in a pot, put a hunk of wood over the top to keep the ashes from falling in. Although we do know that there were lids available in Anglo-Saxon England. I was in England and saw several examples of lids from York. But of course, we don't know if the lowest class had availability lids, but I think everybody had the chance of putting some leaves on the top or whatever, just to keep the ash out. And having eaten food that has fallen into ash with it, you want to keep the ash out. That's common sense.
I have a very quick question. Sorry to interrupt you.
Oh, please.
To what extent is the food in Anglo-Saxon England a function of the time versus a function of the culture? What I mean by that is, we have, for example, contrastive information about the Brittonic populations that contrast with the Anglo-Saxon ones versus, well, this cultivation was introduced and so everybody was eating barley, basically.
As far as I can tell, all the grains, including wheat, were pre-Anglo-Saxon. So some of them were brought in by the Romans, and some of them go way back to Celtic and perhaps pre-Celtic. I haven't gone beyond about 0 AD. or further back than that. It would be really interesting study to do sort of, and I'm sure it's out there, to do the movement of the grain geographically and the various varieties of grain. I'm certain if somebody got on the internet that some lovely archaeologist or a specialist has figured that out, and which grain got into a certain area and whether that affect the population and the health level of the population and all of those questions. But as far as I can tell, most foods were available at the time the Anglo-Saxons came into England. So again, starting with the Romans bringing Germanics into England, and then finally what was originally called the Anglo-Saxon invasion, but clearly is Anglo-Saxon colonization now. Did that answer your question?
Yes, yes. Well, I guess part of the question that maybe wasn't asked is answer is, do we see differentiation of food culture either between different cultures in the islands?
I have not read any sources that talks about that. That would be fascinating to figure out. I would be tempted to compare something like the Irish versus the English, just because not only you've got that saltwater barrier between the two of them, so it's cleaner. And because also the Welsh culture and the Irish culture and a lot of those are so intermingled. And we also have examples of Anglo-Saxon stuff going into Wales. So those types of intermingling, it would be difficult. Let's say if we found 99% wheat use in this specific village in Wales in 672, but I don't know for sure that wasn't an Anglo-Saxon incursion.
Right.
Hard. You need a clearer delineation there to answer that question. It's quite possible people have worked out and found that answer. So the laws, you're welcome. Thank you. The laws of King Athelstan suggest that the normal accompaniment of meat and to bread was meat, cheese, and other seasonal fare. I would say that our serving man who had 2 loaves of bread a day probably was gleaning. Here we go. Even this time of year, and my climate is really similar to Anglo-Saxon England climate. Hi, I'm in northwestern Washington state in the little city of Bellingham, just below the Canadian border on the water. And I've been watching my own weather stations and also reading about weather in Anglo-Saxon England. So it's pretty close. And right now I can wildcraft probably half a dozen what we would call weeds that were available to Anglo-Saxons right now, green. And this is early November, won't be available in the next 2 or 3 weeks. As soon as we have a whole series of frosts, they'll all turn brown and go away. But right now, I'm still getting a nice green, high nutrition source of food. And it will start greening up again in late February, March. So I will not be able to access, if I were a Saxon, these green vegetables for about 4 months. And that, of course, number one, starts to tell you about difficulties with vitamin C and iron for that matter. But also, I mean, think of all the other deficiency diseases you're going to get if you're not eating green food. But our serving man could easily be eating this off the ground, or anyone who's cooking for them could easily be throwing it just as something to put in the stew, the soup, whatever it is. The same thing with cheese. As far as we can tell, cheese was readily available. Again, they're looking at the nutritional profile for bones. Cheese. Don't, if you're going to do Anglo-Saxon food, don't do orange cheddar, because that's really modern. It's got a natto in it or some other even worse source of orange coloration. But these pale cheeses are directly off the goats and the sheep and the cows, and they're perfectly wonderful. And we, again, don't know a lot about Anglo-Saxon cheese. I have a picture of a cheese. Basically, it's a shallow dish with holes in it that is clearly, you put a piece of cloth in, you pour your curds in there, and that settles down, and you can start making your cheese out of that. It's a cheese strainer. So it tells me a lot of things, and I should have pulled this photograph for you. I might be able to find it and just attach it, but it's about this big. It's Roman. It's about yay thick. And so you're going to get a hunk of cheese that's a little bit bigger than our loaf of bread. but that cheese can feed a lot more people. And if you think about the fact that cows, sheep, goats were smaller in the Middle Ages, significantly smaller sometimes, that's another good thing to look at is anything in the way of a religious painting. Oftentimes there's animals in the back. So start comparing the size of the animals with the size of what we consider a standard animal. I have friends with sheep. That sheep comes up just below my shoulder. So she's got pretty big sheep, but nonetheless, it's a 40-inch sheep. And the lambs in the folios I've seen are tucked underneath the shepherd's arm, and the sheep are below knee level. So you're not going to get a lot of milk out of each animal. So you don't need a lot of processing room unless you've got a herd, in which case, of course, you're going to have the gear to be able to deal with that. But I'm thinking of mostly individual farm stands. And we talk a little bit later about what an individual farm might have available. Or if we don't, I can tell you. Okay, so food. And now let's talk a little bit, again, we were talking a little bit about power and prestige. So the menu that you were given kind of works its way up from lower class, poor, probably thrall, i.e. slave, to upper class. So we are starting our meal with the simplest thing I can think of. And again, that's boiled groats. Fills your tummy, good breakfast in the morning, and sends you off with a lot of good, solid, harder to digest carbohydrates, which means it'll last longer for you. Then the next thing on there is whole wheat bread. I actually cheated. This is a lovely, lovely piece. This is actually rye from my local bakery. They throw a few seeds in it. And oh man, I am not necessarily a fan of rye. I think it's too strong most of the time. And this is definitely a light rye, but you just plop a little bit of butter on that if you have that available from your sheep or your cows. And that is a wonderful thing to eat, even if you're lower class. And again, we think that butter was a really, really valuable resource in Anglo-Saxon England because it has fat in it. And if you don't eat fat, you die. Voila. Oh. By the way, if you are eating along with this, take a few extra chews for me and taste the layers of flavor that are available to you in really simple food. So my little green thing here, crunchy, multiple layers. If I'm deficient in something and it has that thing in it, it's just going to taste delicious to me. So the last class talked about some of the recipes that were available online for uses from the Norselands were bland. I think part of what we don't appreciate about food, especially simple food in the Middle Ages, is you were probably hungry. We Americans seldom go hungry, and we don't have that perspective of, oh, this just tastes wonderful. The other thing we need to think about too is that some things are hugely valuable. I don't know if you can see this there. There's just some table salt right there, and difficult to access because probably they were being used to preserve foods rather than being used directly as a grain. And also because they had to be processed. Whether you're boiling them in ginormous lead pans out on the seashore, or you are digging up salt marsh soil, pouring water through it, filtering that water, and then cooking it down, which is one source of gray salt, or whether you have a salt mine somewhere. There are several of those in Anglo-Saxon maps that you can actually trace around. It's really wonderful. I did not put that source. There's several things I'm talking about that I'm not giving you sources for because otherwise you would get my entire 40-page bibliography, and I don't want to do that to you. Anyway, so salt is valuable at multiple levels, and simply having white salt here on the table is an extreme luxury. So butter, again, valuable, probably unsalted, but we don't know for sure. The butter that has been found in bogs in Ireland is apparently plain butter unsalted. Salting your butter or not salting your butter, salted probably lasts longer if it's exposed to oxygen. But if you're putting it in an oxygen-free environment, either by putting it in a bog or putting it in a pot with some type of sealant on top of it, it could probably last you a long time without going rancid. Well, la 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 la. Okay. Meat. There's another myth we need to bust up, and that was that meat was not available to the majority of the population. The archaeologists are telling us that that is incorrect, as far as we can tell. You have, in the 6th century, Benesfield, there's a 6th century cemetery in Benesfield, England. And according to the bone studies, meat was a staple for pretty well everybody in that cemetery. 6th century, so that's the 500s. That is the beginning of the Anglo-Saxon major migrations. The poor ate fish and pig. I mean, this is, by the way, I have to nerd on this. This is a really good example of all the new information that is just coming into us, because the science now let us know what those people were eating based on what's in the bones. Woo! Anyway, so the poor would be eating fish and pig. Benesfield is not too far from the sea. And the richer are going to be eating cattle. So there we have a power differentiation. If the poor are eating fish, they're actually have a better diet than the rich, but that's another story. By the way, the rich also have more rotten teeth than the poor, but that's another story too, because of course, honey. Anyway, there does not appear to be a differentiation between male and female, which I find fascinating. But of course, I will point out to you that it can be difficult to determine what skeletons are male and what are female, depending on what bones are available and who's looking at them. The only blip in the study is that older females had a poorer diet, which could be cultural, or it could be the fact that they had crappy teeth, knowing that women in general tended to die at the same age as men, but I don't know that that's true for Benesfield. I have not read the studies. I've merely read what Heyer told us about what was in the cemetery. So another thing to look at for sources is law codes. There's a bunch of Saxon law codes. So they talk about food based on hospitality, feeding visitors, feeding your dependents. That gets back to the whole Solomon and Saturn is a cultural study that really tells you what you're supposed to be doing. Anyway, food rents. So what was paid to the church or to the Lord, which gives you an idea of what the total amount of food that was coming off a farm, because you're not going to take all the stuff. Pannage laws. So where can the pigs go into the forest, and how long can they be in there, and what can they do, and what happens if a pig gets into your land from the forest, all these sorts of things. And Fratzen talks a lot about those types of law code information telling us about the environment around food and the laws around food, which are significant. And again, I would ask you to remember that food is an indicator of personal and social identity. Let's go back to our food list here. I need to go. Can we take a 5-minute break? I need to go and get the rest of my food because it's in the oven. 5 minutes. Thank you. But if so, they can catch up.
No, but the consensus is that we all do want your 40-page bibliography.
Yep.
Okay, what I'll have to do then is give you the entire daily life in Anglo-Saxon England handout that I do. I should do a 7-hour course on daily life in Anglo-Saxon England that takes you through. This is the middle chunk. And so you'll get a lot of stuff on costuming and metalwork and housing and blah, 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 all that stuff. Okay.
As someone who's just decided they want to be Anglo-Saxon, yes, please.
As
So
someone
you're in
who
on
is-
here, Claire?
Yes, I'll find you later somehow on Facebook or something.
As someone who
where
is
are
helping to schedule the University of Atlanta's joint efforts with Drachenwald and Lockhawk, 21 hours of classes in a row in February.
Well, give
Cool.
me, send that information. Oh, here. Okay, everybody get a pen. 3, 2, 1. My email is mersha@mersha.org, spelled MERSHA, just like it is here without the dash, at MERSHA.org. Send me an email. So, Claire, where do you live?
Dragon's Mist.
Oh, I'm really close. Well, relatively for Ontario. I'm in Thornwell, just in Thierry.
Well, my parents live up in Aquaterra area, so I'm up there a few times a year.
So I will give an open invitation to everybody that's here. You are very welcome to come and spend the weekend going through my book collection. I have about 200 Anglo-Saxon books and peripheral stuff on Norse, and my housemate does Celtic, Roman, and Greek. So we've had a numerous house guests crash on our couch and just spend 3 days reading books. I will promise you, though, that you will stagger out the door somewhat blinded, but that's okay.
Challenge accepted.
Also, I do go to Ontarian at least, Ithras and such like that, and I can bring my book collection. If you're not doing anything else, I'm doing the whole Anglo-Saxon daily life class in Heartwood, which is Vancouver Island, in February. Anyway, so let's talk about root vegetables. So roasted root vegetables, roasting. So before we were boiling, right? So that's our groats, boiled or at least slow cooked. We're baking. Baking can be done 2 ways. It can be done in an oven. You can also bake in coals. So you need something to go over whatever you're baking, clearly. I have no documentation whatsoever that they did coal baking, but it is a very common method of baking. Oh, and you can bake in a pot on the fire as well. I've done that a number of times with buns. Oh, and I should tell you that I have extensive wood-fired cooking experience, and I run a 2-oven bakehouse out north of Clinton, British Columbia every year for several days, and we do a lot of baking in wood there. So I think I can say that I can empathize with Anglo-Saxon bakers, if nothing else. And once you start to understand the way that the wood works and the way that the baking works, your product will turn out beautifully. And it really doesn't depend on the oven unless it's just badly made. Okay, roasted root vegetables. So let's talk about roasting, which is another potential method. Roasting is basically baking, but you are doing something other than bread. Let's put it that way. So it could be in a pot roasted, it could be in an oven roasted, or you could have something with a lid on it and again, stuffed in the coal. So on the surface with the fire underneath of it and a top on it. But then rather than having water as your medium, like you're cooking your groats, you're going to use fat as a medium. So I use butter because yes, they had oil in Anglo-Saxon England. They had olive oil. We know that. That's documented. But as far as I'm concerned, that's really expensive. And now we're in the middle of the social movement in our list of foods. So we started with the simplest and the least expensive. And now we're going, okay, I am a merchant class and I'm going to be inviting a potential customer in to eat with me. So I want to impress them a little bit. I'm going to roast in butter rather than boiling my root vegetables. And I'll put a pinch of salt in there. And in this case, I did sage and marjoram, which are both Anglo-Saxon herbs. And okay, so now let's take a step back and say, I'm not exactly doing a recipe redaction, right? Because there's no recipe. What I'm doing is somewhat my version, which may be incredibly inaccurate, of common sense. These were foods that were available. We know that they ate them because they were available. And to a certain extent, some of these foods have been found in grave sites, but you're not going to grow a beet without eating it. Yeah, you might be feeding it to your animal, but this is quite edible. And yeah, even if the beet is really fibrous, okay, I have 2-year-old beets in my garden. They're fibrous, but you can pull them up. You can scrub the heck out of them because you have to, because otherwise everything gets in the cracks and you're chewing on sand or mud. And then if you cut them really, really fine, they're edible. They're not the best beets in the world. They're not this lovely modern sweet beet with such a lovely aura of interesting beetness. I love beets, but they are edible. And that's what's important. You got to think that if you are middle to lower class, one of the key and important things about food is that you can eat it. And even you may not like to eat it, or you may have to chew a lot, but it's food. So this mixture has turnips, parsnips, and beets in it. They're all just chunked up, roasted. I roasted them in my home oven with a hunk of butter in them, and the herbs and the salt for about an hour, and it's lovely. Now, the previous person who did the Norse pottery cooking talked about that it takes a lot of time. Yes, some of this stuff takes an enormous amount of time, but the more you can leave it abandoned, the more you don't care. So if I roasted this in a pot on the coals covered with ash, and I had done it many times, and I had watched somebody do it many times, I would be really comfortable. I would be as comfortable as if I had left it in my oven at 325 degrees for 60 minutes, because I would know exactly how that wood was going to work, because I knew where that wood came from. Or probably not charcoal. Charcoal is hot. I would not normally be cooking with charcoal. Also, charcoal is expensive. Maybe, again, as you get more advanced, higher up in the hierarchy, maybe your cooks would have access to charcoal. But even then, food usually needs to be cooked at roughly the 300-degree level. Charcoal can get really hot. I cook on wood. I do admit, though, that I keep charcoal off to the side. So if I need to suddenly, for some reason, my wood is wet or whatever, and I need to get some heat into it, I'm going to throw a couple handfuls of charcoal about the size of my little finger or the size of my thumb and get that heat back up as quickly as I can. It's a tool. It's not my main cooking method. Anyway, so this allows me as the Anglo-Saxon merchant to show that I have the ability to provide not just stews and soups, but other types of food that allow you to give that, you get that mouthfeel, and also the luxury of having the fat on the outside. Fat is, again, a luxury. Think of all the fat that you eat in the future, as this would have been a huge luxury. They had access. Even the poor people had to. Okay, now here's something else we need to think about. They had to have access to certain things. You have to have access to protein. You have to have access to vegetables. You have to have access to carbohydrates, or you die. You have to have access to fat, or you die. Humans need these things. So people who say that, oh, the poor never ate meat. Well, yeah, maybe they subsisted on lentils, which aren't a good product in Anglo-Saxon England at that time, according to at least 2 references I've read, because they don't always produce seed. And yes, maybe you could do it with fava beans, broad beans, as the English call them, and you'd have some protein there. Maybe, although the sources also tell me that there's no evidence to show that humans ate fava or broad beans, that they were probably a fodder. Although there's another reference that says, well, if you cook them a lot, they would be edible. And so, yeah, I could see if you're really hungry and the sheep were just having a great time with the fava beans in January, you'd throw them in a pot and cook them as much as you can and give it a try. I could see all that happening. But you can also go sneak out in the woods and grab a couple of rabbit. Send your 7-year-old that's really good with a sling to get some crows down. You're going to do what you have to do to get the food for your family. Because if you don't do that, you die, and we never hear about you because your family died out. Hooray. Did I mention I'm really opinionated about certain things? Okay. Oh, no. Brown bread. The staple of the masses. Yes. That's rye, as I said, with seeds in it. White bread. So you take whole wheat. I urge all of you to do this just because it's a wonderful SCA exercise. Take whole wheat, line a bowl with a nice thin cloth, like a hunk of cotton, or even better, nice linen. Put about a cup of whole wheat flour in it, and then do this over the bowl. And then as you do this, you'll discover there's this white powder coming out underneath, and you do it, and you do it, and you drive you crazy. And eventually you have nothing but wheat bran inside of your fabric, and you have white flour. You've just bolted, pardon me, I'm lying. Anyway, brain again won't let me remember. What's the term for sifting flour so you get white flour out of it?
Bolting.
Oh, it is bolting. Thank you. You've just bolted your flour. So then you take the white stuff and you can make white bread out of it. This is, I just made this yesterday. So this is about 2 cups of flour, and some honey, just a little pinch of honey, and modern yeast and water. Needed 3 times because I figure if somebody's going to be making white flour bread, they want to impress somebody. So I don't know if there's any bread workers out there, but the quorum here is not bad at all. Although it raised a lot, there's a nice uniformity to that. And so I'm smelling it. Yes?
Mersha, I did want to mention there were over 300 other European broad beans aside from fava.
Really?
And they died out when when New World broad beans came in because the New World beans were resistant to the European diseases.
Oh, wow.
So they stopped growing them. Fava is the only one left that we know for sure still is grown out of over 300. Yes, they were eating beans. They just weren't eating fava beans.
So there may have been other beans that were really very edible. However, I also
they were.
Yeah.
They
but
were
I also
food
trust the
crops all over
archaeologists.
Europe and Asia.
Yes.
They just gone.
So I also trust the archaeologists, though, who say that they were eating meat because, of course, meat is going to be digested differently than beans and will lay into the bones differently than a bean amount. What I don't know is if there are any archaeologists out there looking to see if there's a percentage of diet or percentage of marking in the bones that show a non-meat-based protein that they're accepting. That would be fascinating. So we have white bread. The luxury of white bread, I don't need to tell most SCAers, is very significant. This is easier to digest. So as I said, again, if someone is sick in your household, you use white bread. You bolt your flour, you bake your bread, and you give it to the kid who's got the flu or whatever it is that's going on. And also it's a sign that you have the time or the slaves to spend that time. It's also a sign that you're not getting the nutrition you would from brown bread, but that's a whole other story. And you're probably also not getting any damage to your teeth from if you've got a really bad corn. And as you're grinding the bread, the stone is coming off into the brown bread. So, I also threw a little bit of honey on the outside of this bread, just a really thin layer. But you can see how it browns up without overcooking, because of course honey is a sugar and turns brown very easily. And it rose really well, by the way. Oh man, that's good. That honey just gives it that zing. Honey is something that the Anglo-Saxons love. They talk about it a lot. They use it as an analogy for spring and sweetness and love and a lot of other things. Well, love of the land, love of the politics, or that's the wrong term, love of the culture, those sorts of loves. So having honey available to you certainly puts you in middle, if not upper class. Oh, and we got to be really clear about this. Probably 90 to 99% of Anglo-Saxon population is what we would think of as mostly lower class. So they were farmers. They had a really hard life, especially that roughly 20% that were thralls, slaves. But anyone who's done a non-mechanized garden and tried to live off of it. I did a Neolithic garden for one summer because I didn't have any tools available. It's a huge amount of work. It's exhausting. Anyway, so when I talk about lower class and upper class, it's like, yeah, upper class, lower class. And these people are supplying the upper class. But on the other hand, the upper class is also dying in battle for them. So yeah, anyway. So white bread, the symbology of white bread, power, mostly power. A lot of food is power. And as we get higher up in the food hierarchy, the message again is going to be more and more about power. But let's talk about no food. Fasting in Anglo-Saxon England, and I suspect in most of the Christian realm, and now we're talking post-Christian, so post 700 roughly. Fasting is very significant at a number of levels. Fasting can be used as a punishment. You're on the bread and water diet for a certain period of time. If you do something that's really bad, you're on the bread and water diet for 3 years. But fasting isn't just bread and water. It's usually fasting from something. If you read the rules of the monks, it will tell you what a fasting food is and what it is not. And we all laugh about the fact that beaver tails are not meat because they come off of a beaver, which is clearly a fish. No, the tail is a fish. The rest of the beaver isn't. They were certainly doing stuff to get around fasting. So fasting was not necessarily pleasant for a lot of people. The other thing you need to think about if you're reading a document and it says, oh, clearly the damage of these bones was caused by famine. Apparently, other things such as mineral and vitamin deficiencies, diseases, and even stress can cause exactly the same type of damage to bones. So when they say famine, put a little star next to that, maybe a hunk of salt, and keep on reading. And we do know, again, that there was extreme hunger. There's a lot of examples of it in period. What we also know from the bone studies is it was the kids that died and the elderly. What a joy. Anyway. Fasting was also used to minimize costs for certain things. If you can't eat it, you don't have to pay for it. Fasting reminded people of the value of food and to not take it for granted. Fasting could be chosen, and Aelfric of Elsham, which is a very famous commenter in Anglo-Saxon, later in Anglo-Saxon England, has concerned that fasting might be a cover for suicide. Ooh, that's very sophisticated and quite possible. Most fasting appears to be abstaining from milk, eggs, cheese, butter, fish, and wine, which means that fish was valuable. Feasts. So we flip over to the other side to feasting. Feast halls are so interconnected that they become the heroic celebrations. So, I mean, even to this day in the SCA, if you're going to an SCA feast, it's a major celebration. And usually there's some type of bragging or heroism or heroic poem or something. Go to your next feast and listen to how much of the martial is reflected in that feast. Because remember, the Anglo-Saxons, for the most part, became our ancestors, are our ancestors. And so a lot of the cultural norms have been changed and diluted and gone off and merged with other cultural norms, but there's lines in there, especially for a culture like ours that recreates the Middle Ages, not as they truly were, but as they really should have been. We reach back to that sort of thing. We look for that romance. There's also something that I didn't realize, and that is that there probably were alehouses and taverns. Franson talks a lot about some of the literature, mostly discouraging and negative, about people who are in taverns, priests who are seen in taverns, complete descriptions of what the priests were doing and what the tavern was like. It's cool, you know what an Anglo-Saxon tavern was like. Yay! I hate it. I mean, I love it when people complain about stuff because then you get all kinds of information. Importation. Imported food is more valuable, period, because it's expensive. And Anglo-Saxons, I think, maybe even more obviously than other cultures, were into conspicuous consumption because they talk about it a lot. Not directly, but like gold. Gold is wonderful. Saxons talk about gold a lot. There's not a lot of gold in Anglo-Saxon England. Where do they get the gold from? Yeah, they may be stealing it. They may be buying it. They may have found it in the ground and dug it up, but almost all of it is imported, right? And there's a list of imported foods in your appendix, and we can go through those if we don't run out of time. Oh, Megan, thank you. This is my housemate, Megan. Say hi, Megan.
Hi.
And that's my beverage. This is Mulsum in my lovely sterling silver cup. And I'm not going to show you, but Mulsum is basically spiced red wine. And I'm a teetotaler, so I bake mine. And it also allows you to put whole spices in it, cook it very slowly. Again, I use an oven. There's lots of descriptions of methods of heating stuff, beverages in Anglo-Saxon England, and they're usually in pots over the fire. But when I'm doing things modernly, ovens are handy because you have a lot of control over them. Oh, and by the way, none of this gives you the taste or the smell of wood, which would have been, oh, no pun intended, in everything. So, I mean, one question though I have, and I don't think there's any way of answering it, is would they have known it? And I don't think they would have, because if all your food has a single taste in it, if everything tastes of wood, would you have mentioned it? Well, probably not. But one way of doing it, if you want to do it for a feast, is there is smoked salt. So that'd be one way of introducing it without having to create an entire feast, several fires to cook your feast on. And the one thing that was pointed out last class was you probably needed multiple people. I'm thinking the more people you're feeding, the more people you need to be making the food. So I have no idea if you had a 200 person feast, how many people you need out there cooking, but I'm guessing it's somewhere around 40 or 50. Oh, it's strong and it's so good. Okay, we know they feasted. If you want to eat it, you have to grow it. 99, again, percent of the population ate what they grew. Maybe there was a little bit of specialization. I grow a better beef than you do. You have more sheep than I do. Yes, we can trade. Trading is wonderful. But really, you're growing in Anglo-Saxon England what the diet is for the people. But if you're rich, you can get all kinds of stuff. And again, in your appendix is a list of things that we know were imported into Anglo-Saxon England. There may be other stuff as well. I'm guessing that there was, because think about textual evidence and think about archaeological evidence, and then say to yourself, how much are we actually picking up? And my bet it's somewhere between 1 in a billion and 1 in a million, right? So just because we don't know about it doesn't know it existed. But the purpose of experimental archaeology, the purpose of recreation, is to take the data that we have. And you can speculate as much as you want on all this stuff. But I think you also need to think about that we know very little even about the culture, because we don't have a lot of poetry. We know that the Saxons did a lot of poetry. We hardly have anything. It's really discouraging to a certain extent, but you soldier on because you're an essier. That's cool. All right. Food preservation. There's cool packing, which is basically taking hard vegetables and hard fruit and putting it in something or laying it out somewhere so it stays cool but doesn't freeze and also doesn't mold or mildew. Cabbage, apples, what else do I have in here? Onions, the alums, etc. This is cold packing. There's, here we go. Drying. Probably not meat. I don't know. Maybe they dried meat. I'm too paranoid to dry meat in Anglo-Saxon circumstances. Possible. Pickling. We know the Norse did a lot of pickling. I'm going to say the Saxons were capable of that as well. Pickling is just basically anything that's high acid liquid that you put things into. So that could be any of the fruits, anything that goes from being fermented to being acidic. Also whey. I know that they've documented in Iceland that whey was used as pickle. And there's all sorts of information on that, including huge vats that you just throw stuff into and then pull it out later, which just is so cool. But anyway, smoking, which is really easy, I would think, in Anglo-Saxon England, because you got a fire in the middle of your house and you've got open attic space of some kind that is smoked most of the time. And I know that because I've been in reproduction houses that have doorways, and basically anything above the height of the doorway or anything above the height of a smoke hole we're assuming no chimneys, is smoke, because the smoke rises up and it's going to be warmer than everything else, right? Because you don't have any insulation, so the rest of the room is cool. And you can leave the smoke up there. And also the smoke has two other real advantages. And the first one is it makes your roof stay around longer because it kills things in your roof. And secondly, it makes any food that you store up there stay around longer because nothing can go in there. You can't get mice, you can't get bugs, because nobody can breathe really high intensity smoke full time. So smoking could be either a matter of just storing stuff up there and it gets smoked naturally, or again, you could do the concept of a smokehouse. I cannot document smoke housing or any other form. I haven't seen anybody talk about that anywhere. Maybe Honor knows something about it. I haven't. And lastly, salting. And we were talking about really high salt. You can cover something with salt and then you can smoke it. You can salt it and let it sit. You can salt it and put it in a container. Salt is a wonderful thing because bacteria, viruses, fungus, none of them like it. And even insects and rodents tend to stay away from it to a certain extent. There are things that really like to eat salt. So you have to have basically either up somewhere where it's full of smoke, or you have to have it in a sealed container. Voila. Cooking. Okay, we all know it's wood, charcoal, etc. No documentation of coal or anything else. Coal was available in Anglo-Saxon England, but I have no evidence to show it's used for cooking. And if you've ever tried to cook anything over coal, which I have, it tastes like crap. You're not used to coal-fired food. It is just horrible. So I don't think they cooked on coal. So we have a fire for the most part inside in the center. It's going to keep everybody warm with radiated heat, and you can cook on it at the same time. There's some evidence for outside kitchens, which might have simply been somebody's house that they did the majority of cooking for somebody else. Who knows? Most cooking in pottery. Yeah, soapstone I can see for the Norse. I'm not seeing a lot of soapstone sources in Anglo-Saxon England because there wasn't a lot of soapstone in England. Okay. You're rich, you probably had an iron, copper, brass, something like that pot, which may or may not have been poisoning you, but that's another story. Too much copper is not good. A little bit of copper is good for you. Too much copper is really bad for you. You can put food into pottery as cold and move it towards the heat. You don't want to throw your pottery vessel directly on the heat because it will crack. And even in Anglo-Saxon England, pottery was probably not cheap. It appears that we have localized pottery available. Many villages had a certain type, but it overlapped with non-local pottery that came from other places. It was higher quality, better made, the whole, if you've done pottery, the pinch pot pottery versus pottery done on a wheel, higher quality clay lasts longer, is better. Lower quality clay tends to fall apart if you cross your eyes at it, etc. Don't find any chimneys in Anglo-Saxon England. So yeah, you're dealing with a lot of smoke, which is probably why the age of death is lower in Anglo-Saxon England, even though the people there were healthier than later period, which is really interesting. And I suspect as we get more causes of death laid out, we're going to find out that a lot of it is lung-based diseases, but that's my hypothesis. Maybe some spit cooking, certainly boiling, stewing. We've talked about that, baking and frying. There are fry pans. Long handle fry pans. Can't be anything else unless you're like, I don't know, tossing pancakes or something. Nah. By the way, pancakes have to be Anglo-Saxon. I have no documentation for that, but you do have thin bread dough, right? I'm in too much of a hurry to bake something, or I don't have an oven. So I got a little bit of fat in the bottom and thin bread dough, and then I turn it over and bam, I've got food, and it's bread-based and it's wonderful and it's hot. Stewing apparently was the most favored, according to Hire. Okay. You need an oven, but you can do ashes for baking. There were little cakes. I have several sources that talk about little cakes. Now, I can interpret that in like 4 different ways, and I have not been able to dig that out. But I think what they're talking about is buns, because buns are really, really easy to cook on an open fire. You have a pot. You get a fat source, hunk of pork fat or butter or whatever you have. Do it on the interior of your clay pot before it gets heated up. You're gonna make your buns. The ones we make are usually about big, maybe 2 inches across. Flatten them out, whack them against the side of the grease, and on the bottom, try not to let them touch each other. Put it in the edge of the fire. You might want to rotate it so that it's getting even heat. And you'll figure out, again, the more practice, the better. Throw a hunk of wood over it or a lid. And you will know how long to leave it in there and how many times to turn it when you come it out. You just sort of unscrew your buns that have all kind of grown in together. Or you have a low rise yeast. Different yeasts for different needs. I don't know. And you get these little buns, and they're just the most beautiful thing. You pop them open, you put a little piece of fruit in them or some butter, or just eat them the way that they are, maybe a little bit of salt. And they cook really fast. You don't need an oven, although ovens are very handy. Think about food loss. I need to go back to food preservation. Let's see. There's some evidence to show that food loss was at least 10%. And one of my resources, I think elsewhere, I may be talking about that in the farming class, says that there was a 50% loss of food in India pre 1947 to rodents. 50% loss. But that's India. It's warmer. I don't know. So from this information, we can start talking about common meals. And this is from Fowler, who also did a lot of stuff with anathemas. And he says brew, which is a gruel of cereals, herbs, and onions. We would probably call it a pottage. Maybe there's some leeks in it. I'm saying leeks, cabbage, and nettle commonly. You could throw that in. Probably not doing a lot of pre-cooking. Remember that whoever is doing the cooking is doing a lot of other stuff. And unless they are a thrall that specializes in cooking, or unless you have a really large family and other people can do the other things, they're going to be doing a lot of other stuff. So they want stuff that is relatively unmonitored, does not need a lot of monitoring to cook. So something like a pottage that can still be pretty darn moist, and you can throw a hunk of wood on top to keep the moisture in, and you can put it on the side and keep it on it while you're spinning or watching the 2-year-old or doing whatever else you need to be doing would be good. A cereal-based thing of some kind on top of that, maybe porridge, pottage, again, bread, mini cakes. They're saying a sauce, a condiment, maybe if the stuff is dry. I could see you'd need something else to add onto it. Can't document gravy. Gravy's hard because you need some type of broth, right? And then you need a thickener, which you could do with raw. I've thickened with whole wheat flour. It's not as good as white flour, but you can do that. And then you get gravy. And the longer you cook it, the more gravy-ish it is. And maybe you can throw in the last few scraps of meat you have. And then something to drink. Now, water is an interesting subject. Let's talk about beverages really quickly. Water from a spring blessed by a saint can be drunk with no problems that will not make you sick. I thought I'd let you know that. So the next time you're at an event and they offer you water, you should ask the person supplying the water if it came from a spring blessed by a saint. That's very important. I'm really tempted to ask my municipal water system if that's true. But anyway, so I can make beer. I can take barley and I can dry it, and then I can add a little bit of moisture to it, and I can set it aside and it will start to sprout. And then I can roast it. And by the sprouting and the roasting, it adds a little bit of sugar, which is a great thing. And then I can pour water on it and maybe either expect the yeast to fall down and do its thing, or more likely I'll throw a hunk of brown bread dough, not cooked, into it, stir it all up or let it stir itself, put it off the side. In a day or so, I will start having beer, which is basically alcohol from the yeast pea, maybe a little bit of carbonization from the yeast exhale, and the whole thing, the yeast just eating all of that lovely sugar from the roasting and the carbs from the leftover grain that has not been roasted. And the yeast is just doing its job, and it's adding alcohol, which is killing all the bad stuff in the water, right? And it's also adding, you still have vitamin B in there. You probably have a good level of iron, at least a little bit from the barley, which is higher in iron than wheat. And then you can drink it because it's not going to make you sick. Or if you're wealthy, you're importing or perhaps even making wine using virtually the same situations, except you squish the grapes. Can't document white wine, but definitely there was red wine because they talk about the color. And also we know that the Romans had wine that was red. And if you're really fancy, you're going to take your beer or your wine or whatever you're making, and you're going to add spices to it. Spices are not grown in Anglo-Saxon England. So every time you put a spice in something, you're saying, I'm taking money and drinking it. Yay, I'm wealthy. Don't bother me. Make me happy. And that's sort of the whole bit about conspicuous consumption. Showing your rank is another way of making sure that you and your family are safe, because the more conspicuous my consumption, the more wealthy I am, the more powerful I am, and the more you want to be my friend. Okay. Eggs into omelets and maybe used in sweet dishes. I'm not sure what that was. Higher just talks about that. You can hollow out bread, put meat and vegetables inside. Presumably those are cooked before you put it in the bread. Not that you have raw bread that's hollow and you cook it in there, although that is not a modern concept. We have all sorts of pasties and such like that in later periods. Again, we have no recipe books and no recipes, so I can't tell you if they made pasties or not. Benham thinks that chicken was a poverty food. I could see that. Chickens reproduce readily. You don't need a lot of equipment to have chickens. You need somewhere to put your chickens. I have difficulty with people putting their chickens in their housing just because they poop all over the place. The same thing with ducks and geese and all that sort of stuff. You can train, apparently, you can train sheep not to poop in certain places. And the same thing with cattle. I don't know about goats. They do their own thing, and I haven't heard anything about that. But I am reliably told that you can convince mammals to not poop in your house. But birds, it'd be easier just to build a little wattle hut outside and put them there for the night, as far as I'm concerned. I do provide you with a few recipes that I've used. On page 3, again, these are not documented except for the sausages. Sausages. Okay. Tacitus in the 1st century in the Germanica, which you should read because it talks about the ancestors of the Anglo-Saxons, talks about this horrible food. By the way, Tacitus thinks a lot of stuff the Germanica do is horrible. So this horrible food. They take pig intestines and then they stuff them and then they cook them and then they eat them. Oh, that's gross. Sausages. I figure if Tacitus had my Anglo-Saxon ancestors eating sausages in the 1st century, they're not going to stop eating sausages. Why should they? And besides, this is such a practical food. What are you going to do with pig intestines except chop them up and like boil them and then they're like, I don't know. But if you can stuff grain and vegetables, he doesn't tell you what gets stuffed in there. Other forms of meat scraps, stuff like crazy, tie off both ends, boil it up. Oh, so good. We also know from him that they drank beer because they drink rotten barley water. I love Tacitus. He also talks about the culture of the Germans. Now, you got to take Tacitus with a couple of medium-sized grains of salt, because as far as we know, he never actually went to the Germans. He's probably quoting from other sources. He may have been interviewing people, who knows. And there's a lot of historians that don't like the way he depicted battles and all that sort of stuff. But the whole thing with sausages and beer, this is not necessarily something you're going to make up that turns out to be real, right? You got 2 points of data, admittedly at a distance, but they agree with each other. To me, that adds to the veracity of the data stream, so to speak. And that's an example of evaluating your data. if you have a single data point, and especially if it's like weird, if you have two data points, especially if they're separated in time and space and they're virtually identical, ooh, you start getting 3 or 4 data points that are separated in time and space and they're virtually identical. Oh, one might be, I don't know, a tree root went in there and did something silly with the bone. But if you have an entire cemetery of people who are eating meat in the 6th century, that, unless there's something wrong with the evaluation of the entire cemetery, in which case I would hope that the professional archaeologists are tearing apart the work that was done by the people in that cemetery. Okay. Certainly we know they had bread because everybody had bread. Bread's Egyptian, bread cited, the Romans had bread, the Franks had bread. And there's probably stuff that has been burned bread that has been found in Anglo-Saxon England. So yeah, they had bread. So how do you cook it?
We've got a
You
couple
griddle
of
bread.
questions and a hand up. Do you want the questions now or do you want to hold them for the end?
Oh, good. Yeah, good question.
Okay. So the first question is, do you count any of the herb flavorings they grew, like fennel?
Like what?
Like
Fennel?
fennel?
Oh, heck yeah.
And let's see.
Yeah, if you go to my list of food on pages, blah, 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 bottom of page 5 through 6 and into 7, and you go to herbs, as agreed to meats. Oh, here we go. Yeah, under herbs. I think I've got all of the herbs that were cited in. Oh, by the way, this list is from Hagen. I just went through and wrote down every single food that she talked about in Anglo-Saxon England. I had a little bit from Fowler, which is anathemas. And then I've added a few from a few other sources.
And then Honor has her hand raised.
Hey, Honor, talk to me. Here we go.
Okay. One thing about the barley, etc., it isn't beer unless you have hops. Did the
Okay, yes,
Anglo-Saxons have hops? It was all ale.
Except that we now think they might have had hops.
Okay, good, because that's new.
That's one of those lovely things when the archaeologists are kind of arguing with each other. Yeah, and I'm not using the term beer correctly. And if you really want to get nerdy, there is an Anglo-Saxon word called beer, B-I-E-R. But we don't know that that's B-E-E-R because there was this break in the use of the words that I think is like 300 years long. So yes, technically it's ale without hops. Thank you. Anything else?
You're welcome.
Okay, next question. Oh, sorry.
I think we've got a couple of comments, but that was the only question, unless you happen to know how old the knowledge might be of the different woods that are being used in cooking and their different burn times and heats.
I was mostly thinking about when, because I'm the one that asked that, but when Ruth Goodman was talking about, well, it came up in a book that I haven't actually finished reading that I've got back to about how literally everything changed when they switched to coal cooking with Victorian, and you had to change the laundry and all that. But the knowledge is, it talks. There's a whole section about the different woods and the cooking times and like temperatures and things.
Yeah, that data is out.
And so how really like wood is an ingredient you've got to remember.
Yeah, and also the other interesting thing is we talk about plants changing, food plants. What about trees and stuff? I mean, who knows? But there's some information on wood. This is in your bib, Material Culture of Daily Living. By the way, if you are interested in Anglo-Saxon culture, get this book, read this book. You don't have to buy it. Go to your local library, talk to the research librarian, get an interlibrary loan for 3 weeks and just immerse yourself in it. It is fascinating. Basically, it's a Bible of Anglo-Saxon culture and material, especially material culture, and it's wonderful. So there's some discussion of wood in here. There is the Anglo-Saxon Farms and Farming book. If you're interested in how the food was produced, there's also some discussion of wood in here and how it was farmed. Their argument, okay, this is different people, but a lot of the argument in here is that the forests were as farmed towards the middle to the end of Anglo-Saxon culture as much as the fields were farmed. Because they knew exactly what they needed and they got it as much as possible. I mean, even the oak woods where you've got pigs in there, the oak's still being trimmed and pruned and the nuts are being picked up when the pigs aren't getting it and all those sorts of things. Acorn's important. Any other questions?
That was the last of the questions. There was a note that they excavated a ship full of hops from the 10th century.
It would be interesting to know if it was leaving Anglo-Saxon England or coming to, but the information I read, and I don't remember where it is that they were growing hops in Saxon England, and certainly they have the climate for it. If you were importing it and you could grow it, I would go and get those seeds and start growing it.
It was in the Thames.
It was in the Thames. The Thames is fascinating. There's lots of stuff in there. There's swords, war swords in the Thames. Anyway.
I just remembered one thing about chickens.
Yeah.
Before the modern era, chickens laid an average of 14 eggs a year. And at 14 eggs a year, common people are not having flocks of chickens. They may have like 3 hens to lay all the eggs they're going to get, but they are not having 60 and 100 hen flocks. And at 14 eggs a year, you can't afford to keep large flocks of hens.
Even if you're feeding them on very little grain during the winter, grain is expensive. And the last thing I read was that the grain production was basically for every bushel you plant, you get a bushel and a quarter, which means you have to save that bushel in order to seed for the next year, right? Your reproduction rate on grain is really low. The modern grains that we have grown to be fast growing with really high quality soil, tended perfectly, planted really closely, blah, 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 blah. It's not what we got in the Middle Ages.
And I guess a good question then is, because I'm reading now, and that's wild chickens, and when did they start domesticating chickens in that area?
Before the Roman period.
Because I imagine that they would want to, of course, whichever chicken, if you get one chicken who's like, oh, you've laid 2 more eggs this year, actually, we're breeding you. And they probably would have obviously bred for more eggs.
It depends. Yeah. If their production is eggs, if one of the farm payments they had to make was eggs, yes, then they would focus on the eggs coming out of their chicken. But if what they really wanted was the meat out of the chicken, they might focus on having a bigger bird that grows more quickly. And that might also explain the species differentiation that we start seeing towards the end of the Middle Ages as well.
Right.
I'm hypothesizing. I don't know.
Because I have a hypothesis. They're like, well, if this is a thing that we eat for protein where you're not killing the bird and you keep getting more eggs over several years, obviously, you don't want to kill your chickens.
Yeah, absolutely. Chicken eggs are very high in nutrients too. So you might learn fairly quickly that if you have somebody that's sick, you're going to be feeding them eggs, which are mild on the stomach. So it suddenly becomes medicine, which makes it even more valuable.
Another factor is that at the time of the end of the Roman occupation of England, a goose laid as many eggs a year as a chicken did. And geese grow faster, grow bigger, are better parents, and can eat grass.
Yes,
that's
so you
true.
can send a 5-year-old to tend a flock of 10 geese. And as long as you give her a little stick to hit them with when they try and wander into the garden, you're way ahead of what you at that time would be dealing with chickens, which do need grain.
Not to mention pheasants. I mean, there's so many other things, and you could possibly, go find just other species of eggs out in the woods while you're gathering your acorns. You're like, well, now there's a nest of eggs. Let's get that too. Just food. Hypothesis there. As someone who's eaten a lot of weird eggs.
Where are you? Pardon me, I'm looking for my Anglo-Saxon daily life handout for you.
I'm actually rather sad that geese is so expensive on the market these days. I had it once for Thanksgiving. I'd love to do it again, but not if it's just the 2 of us.
If you're willing to go that far, you can order potted geese, a can of potted geese from France. Got goose meat, I mean. And it's not that expensive. It's really weird.
Does it have the same texture, though? I really enjoyed the texture. It was like a good roast beef, actually. We did it as part of a Charles Dickens we were gonna do a Charles Dickens dinner, and then we didn't do it when we planned, and so we had it for Thanksgiving. We did a flaming pudding and stuff too.
So I just posted my daily life handout. I'm
Excellent.
working on it, and I will be doing some major changes to it. Yes, goose is very fatty, so you have to cook it on a rack, and you have to like, there's methods you can use to reduce the fat. Go online and it talks about that. There's pre-boiling and all this sort of stuff, but goose is very, very fatty, which from, again, a medieval standpoint is a really good thing because fat is expensive and vital. Ooh, where are we? Any more questions?
Question. There was a grain mix called maslin, which is growing wheat, rye, and barley together.
Yes.
Was that common in Anglo-Saxon England?
We don't know.
Oh.
The most recent books I've read say, yes, they could have done it. There's a lot of advantages to it. That doesn't help me. I noticed that I haven't found any citations that said, oh yes, this mass of grain that we found in the burned down something or another had all of these 4 grains in it or something like that. Which means to me that if they did it, they either sorted the grain one at a time. I don't know, maybe they had sieves. Given the, at least modernly, the size of barley versus the size of wheat, you'd have to have a really specific sieve. Or it was an unusual thing. There's certain advantages to that, but the harvesting could be different. And if you wanted bread, you really need wheat. You know about gluten development? Okay. Wheat is kind of unique because it has gluten in it, which is why people's stomachs have problems, but that's another story. And the more you work powdered wheat, also known as flour, especially white flour, the more the gluten chains get together and you get these long fibers that come out. And that means that you get this lovely stuff that has holes in it, and the holes make it tender. So yeah, you can make barley bread. You can make bread out of ground beans. You can make all kinds of bread. And unless you're soaking it in broth or something, it's really hard to eat. I mean, I've made barley bread, 100% barley bread. And if you slice it thinner than my little finger and spread it with butter and eat it from the side, it's delicious. Because it holds together that way because it's agglomerated. It's not glutenized. Yeah, so if you had mixed grains, I'm thinking that maybe that could be used for porridge or something like that. A pottage, you could use it for the water cook base, but you'd have a lot of trouble making bread out of it.
Well, both rye and barley do have gluten in it.
They do.
I know because I'm gluten casein intolerant and I can't eat them.
Yeah, but they don't have as much, and you can work. Well, then you get into, okay, you can take barley flour. You might want to try this. Take barley flour, treat it like wheat, add water, add yeast, let it bubble up, add some more barley flour until it's nice and thick, work it, let it sit. And then take another part of it and work it like crazy, like you would wheat. Just knead it for 5, 10, 15 minutes. And then when they've both risen up a little bit, knead it again. Once you've kneaded the one and you've worked it a lot, you kind of have glue, because the how can I explain this? The gluten fibers hold things together, but it's almost a dry form. It's not dry, but versus the gluey, overworked rye or barley. So yeah, I mean, they do have gluten, but they don't have a lot of gluten in them. And I suspect that if you start looking at 100% or almost 100% rye bread, the last time I looked at a label, it said something like gluten added. Of course, you have to add gluten to rye bread to make it so that you can actually work with it. You can actually eat it. But we are also speculating based on current grain. I have no idea if barley from 972 had 10 times as much gluten in it or whatever. And maybe you could make wonderful barley bread out of just 100% barley. I have no idea if you grew barley and wheat together. That would be an interesting experiment. And then ground them both and made bread out of them simultaneously. If you still had an edible loaf that wasn't, glued concrete or something like that.
Well, I can tell you that our rice is absolutely different. Because grasses in general, so like our genetics are 2N, right? You get one set from your parents and one set from
Yeah.
each of your parents.
Mhm.
Plants are really freaking weird, and some of
Yeah.
them can get up to like 14N. They just
Woo!
don't quite split like that, and they just merge them. And that's why actually some of my friends that are gluten intolerant will have way less problems with European wheat that is not hybridized, and also the einkorn from Jovial
Mhm.
Flowers Farms, whatever, that is like supposedly 10,000 years old and not like altered
Well,
because it's
einkorn is
yeah
also found in Anglo-Saxon
yeah
England.
yeah yeah yeah. So like, but yeah. So if you're going off of like a recipe and you're just using modern wheat flour,
Mhm.
it's not going to be the same. Not nearly the same. Go for that
Yeah.
einkorn flour.
Well, and the other issue is that spelt emmer and einkorn are both hulled. All three are hulled, which means that the case around the grain wants to stick to it. And in order to get that off, you have, let's see, you have to soak, pound, and or heat to remove that hull. And sometimes, I mean, when I've been playing with it, sometimes you're using your fingernail to peel the stupid hull off of it so that you can actually play with it because you
Mm-hmm.
tried all those things and the stupid hull is still glued to the outside of the blankety blank grain.
Well, if I'm remembering from like what they said specifically on the jovial one was because God, it's been a while since I've had agrostology class, but there's three parts to it because and to the caryopsis, which is the botanical term for the fruit
Uh-huh.
of a
Yeah,
grass,
yeah,
and
yeah.
and like basically like you take out what makes it a whole wheat, and in the einkorn flour they're putting part of it back. So from my experimentation with flour that my husband would actually, because he doesn't like whole wheat flour unless it's a digestive biscuit with dark chocolate. Sorry, husband. Actually, he can't hear me. He doesn't like the whole wheat. He more likes the jovial flour, but he will actually prefer about a half and half of the jovial and an all-purpose flour. Or although these days I'm just using bread flour.
Yeah.
But yeah, so like it's not still not an all if you look at the bag of flour as soon as you open it, it's not as dark as a whole wheat flour either.
Mhm.
So it's like half whole wheat, we could say,
And
which is kind of
so
which is very fascinating.
did the Saxons use mixes of grains to make their bread? And my answer is yes and no. Yes, because if that's all you had available and you wanted bread, you do it. And if you have enough training from your parents or whatever, you can figure out how to do it well. Otherwise, maybe you're turning it into a pottage or you have a rock hard hunk of grain that you are having to cut off and dip in broth or something to get it edible. Yeah.
There used to be
People
a,
you
a
have to
guy
eat when you're hungry.
There used to be a guy in the UK. He's a thatcher, and he grew stuff that they'd found up in the. Mistress Eulalia could expand upon this. He's in the Tudor Monastery Farm. Someone he's John Letts, and he because of the stuff that they found in the thatching that they don't take off thatched roofs, right? They just keep putting
Yeah.
more on. So
Yeah.
he grew grains that were 400 years old, and
Ooh.
made flour out of it. And I have
Ooh.
had pie out of West Coast actually out of that. But I just was Googling. He used to get it on Bakery Bits, and it looks like he is no longer currently doing that. So either that's a pandemic thing or a tariffs thing right now, or who knows. But
We
that
had
was
someone at our last Kingdom Arts and Sciences who baked 3 loaves of bread. One from the Roman recipe, one of the Roman recipes from Pompeii that survives.
mhm.
So they had 7 different recipes, one for each day that were in commercial production, one for each day of the week. And I think she made Wednesday bread. And she also made an early medieval, like Viking type bread based on the archaeological evidence,
Mhm.
and like a 14th century bread based on
Yeah,
the archaeological evidence. And she did a lot of research into the grains that were used and the proportions,
Mhm.
because according to her research, mixed grains was quite common. Um,
from what I've heard, it's
and
because of the farming of like you just because you're hand harvesting, you can, if you want, separate out the crops, unlike modern. But also, if one of your plants fails, you've got the backup of you growing the other three things in the same place.
and
Yes.
as you as you
Yes.
as you
Also, by the
vary
way,
the
all I know
proportions,
is from watching all the Tudor Monastery farm show, BBC farm shows over and over and over again.
as you vary the
So
proportions, it affects the nature, the nature of the bread.
Yes.
And she said that the best flour to get that was used, the earliest one is one called red fife flour. And there are a few places in our kingdom where it's available, but it's one of those heirloom types.
Yeah.
But it goes back to it's the same species of flour of wheat as was found in the archaeological evidence.
Ooh.
I think I've heard of that one before, and actually, I feel like this one's locally. I'll just
There's
probably
another
take
red
that.
wheat one that isn't that is our common our because I found there's this other red flour and I thought this other red wheat and I thought this is the right one and I went to her and she said no, that's the same species as everyone is doing these days. Red fife is the one to go for.
Apparently, there's a place in Eugene, Oregon that sells it.
We
For
go.
those of us on the West Coast, so you don't have to buy fancy
Eugene.
things from the Europe.
Eugene is cool.
There's one other thing about our having trouble with same name of the plant, not necessarily the same plant.
Yes.
Europe had 300 broad beans. Fava is a broad bean. All of them except Fava, they threw them to the pigs when New World beans became available because the New World beans were resistant to European bean diseases.
So if you are concerned about the changes in words for plants, if you go in the middle of page 7, right above the bib, I've got you a couple of areas where you can go. There's the Anglo-Saxon Plant Name Survey, ASPNS. You can search for that. There's the Dictionary of Old English Plant Names, DOEPN. Both of those were under development when Higher was written in 2013, and I haven't looked up to see if they're finalized or not, but they were available online at that time. I know I looked. And the best in-source, in-period source for plants is the Old English herbarium. The problem with that is it's Southern European, so it's a problem for us Saxon types. And there's apparently errors in the copy, according to Higher, which I would believe because I think Higher knows everything and I worship at their feet. Not as much as Hagen, but definitely worship is involved. So we only have another 21 minutes. Any other questions? I'm just going to go whipping through this handout. You guys can read it all on your own. Eating equipment, think wood and pottery, think metal if you are upper class, very much upper class glass. Even above that, check out the Sutton Hoo burial and the Prittlewell burial for upper class eating equipment. Early period, both of them.
There's one more question that just
once you start, you can also start looking in any of the Anglo-Saxon religious texts that have drawings in them, basically what we think of as scrolls. And there's some eating equipment in the background of that. The Exeter book has got some eating equipment. Be careful because some of that is copied from continental sources. But sometimes you can go eating equipment. Oh, that looks like what has been found with something over here. It's useful. Forks existed. They're small, they're wide. They go wide enough to go in a 4 to 6 inch cook pot is what the reference says. So yes, it's for me, that's a cooking tool. It's not something I'm stuffing in my mouth, clearly. Although we do have one Anglo-Saxon spork, fork at one end and the spoon at the other. And the fun part about that is if you want to make one, you just find a wooden spoon and cut a little 2-prong fork in the other end, something kind of short. And you can have your own Anglo-Saxon spork. Really easy to do. Cups, bowls. Okay, what's made out of wood? Cups, bowls, platters, spoons, lids, kneading troughs, trays, baskets, barrels, spatulas, buckets, churns, and handles for iron implements. Glassware. If you have anything made out of glass, that's a huge luxury because glass breaks. And on to page 4. This might be the most useful pages to you. So again, this is from Hagen. Those of you who have not seen the Bible of Anglo-Saxon, food in your bib, and Hagen's production, distribution, and processing and consumption. I find her really readable once you sort of get over the I'm writing this for fellow professionals thing, so she has to write in a certain language. But Just really useful and nicely laid out, good references, humongous bibliography, dated just a little bit. There's some new, and I've tried to give you a lot of the new Anglo-Saxon information that I've been able to pick up that may or may not agree with Hagen, but that's fine. What else? You might also want to check out, just for the fun of it, Anathemas, as I said, is not from Anglo-Saxon England. There's several different translations. I like this one. This is Fowler's. But what I like doesn't really matter. But he goes into a lot more depth about food. And this is Frankish, so it's just across the puddle. Pardon me, the English Channel. Well, they called it that. The Norse called it the puddle. Now there's a lot. The Leichdom is online. You can certainly look that up, but this is one book that does not have the whole Leachdoms in it, but it has some, and that's Cameron. I don't think I put this in your bib, so let me give you this. Anglo-Saxon Medicine by M.L. Cameron, published, talk to me here, darling, published in 1993 for my mother on her 100th birthday, and he's the one that really started telling us things like, when the Leachdoms say do 7 paternosters, it's a timing method. These people were very common sense. They're just as smart as we are. And for their environment, they're smarter because they know a lot more about what's going on than we do. There's several books on the market like this one, Food, Eating, and Identity, that purport to give you Anglo-Saxon foods and such. I like this one because it talks about identity, which I think is really important. You have to have the context of it all before you can understand why something is more important than something else. And I kind of like that. But at the same time, I mean, what I tried to give you throughout this conversation was, we don't know. We just don't know, but we can make a guess. And we can say, I don't know about this, but we know that they had leeks. And so I'm going to make leek soup by frying in butter some leeks. And then I'm going to pour cow's milk over it. We don't know that they put milk in any sort of heated thing, but you got milk. It's not a bad guess. What else do I want you to walk away with? Play with it. As far as I'm concerned, if you are not entering a contest, you do your best on a general level. If you're in a contest, you say, I am basing my analysis on this data. And the people in the contest, if they are good judges, will help you go forward in that and help you take your action a little bit further. And let's end the contest with some luxury food. I have here. Oh, this is interesting. So odds are they probably didn't, for the most part. Again, 95 to 98% of the 99% of the population were I'm dropping meat. Poor, but this is a lovely hunk of lamb roasted with garlic and lamb. And I put a bunch of herbs on it too, all of them on your list. Oh. And you can cut, there's some sage. Roasted sage in and of itself, by the way, with some fat is wonderful. And so that is a wonderful example of, again, what could have been available. Very simple, easily done in an oven or in a pot with a lot of fat. Watch it cook slowly. There is, and here, let's take another step. There is no documentation for rice in Anglo-Saxon England. There's documentation for rice further east and further south, but it's kind of fun to speculate. So this is just water, rice, salt, and saffron, because I figure Anglo-Saxons loved gold. And I don't know if you can see the lovely color of that rice dish, but I could have also done this as kneading into white bread, which would have made it gold. Let's see, what else could I have added? Oh, I could have put it in cheese. I'd made the cheese gold. Anyway, besides, saffron tastes wonderful. And again, imported. Oh, here's another trick. If you read the leachdoms, you discover that you can grind mustard and make it into a poultice. They had mustard. We know that. They had grinding. We know that because we have grinders. So once you've made it into a poultice, you can have ground mustard, which goes really well with those sausage things that Tacitus hates. And yes, you can grind your own mustard. That's a hint. You could grind your own mustard as a contest entry. And I've had ground mustard as contest entries, 5 types of ground mustard. It was wonderful. But if you don't have the time, and grinding mustard can be hard on your eyes and hard on your back and everything else, there are several varieties of ground mustard you can get in the grocery store. And all this really is salt, vinegar, and ground mustard. So you just read the ingredients. And the other advantage is I can hold this to an event if I want in the jar. I can have the ingredients readily available to anybody who has sensitivities. And it can be sitting in my kitchen, easily accessible if it turns out that I need it. So we are getting within 13 minutes of closing down. I have attached my latest draft of my Anglo-Saxon paper for my 9-hour class. By the way, anybody who reads this stuff, if you find mistakes, you have my email, Mersha, see my name, Mersha without the dash, @mersha.org. Do send me data. If you see something that isn't in my bibliography, send me that information. That's half the reason I'm here, is to learn from you. I have so much to learn.
There's one thing that I just remembered on the subject of foods that have changed.
Yeah.
Anglo-Saxons, we know, loved peas. God knows they grew enough of it. But the peas they were growing are so different from modern food peas for people that they might as well be another species. They were growing what is now called animal fodder, the gray field pea.
Yeah.
And
which was
gray
gray
field peas combined with bread are the same protein as steak.
Yeah, but peas, we don't find a lot of peas in the archaeological records. We don't find a lot of pea pollen. And it's possible they came in a little bit late. That's what I'm hearing from the archaeology books. And for those of you that want green split pea soup for Anglo-Saxons, they didn't cook up green. They cooked up gray or brown. I've actually grown field peas and tried to cook them. And either I got the wrong variety or they just hated me because they never softened. It was really interesting. Oh, yeah. And by the way, we're talking about imports. So I forgot to finish with this. Dates and raisins. Dates clearly an import because they did have grapes. It's possible they had raisins. We have no evidence to show that they dried the grapes. But, if you leave grapes on the vine, they will dry themselves. And I could easily see if I was a kid or hungry or just curious, snapping it off and chewing it down and spitting out the pips, because remember that grapes in that era had big seeds in them, and deciding that it doesn't taste too bad. Although if you have raisins from wine grapes, they're still going to taste sour. There's some sugar in them, but it's not like eating table grapes that we have now that are sweet even in the grape, let alone when they go down and become a raisin. Any other comments?
Can I dare to correct you on that? Because I'm a winemaker, but wine grapes are far, far sweeter than table grapes.
Oh, really?
Yes.
I got the wrong grapes.
Yeah. It's possible that now the interesting thing is that, and maybe this is a question for you. It's unbelievable how during at least the high Middle Ages and then later grapes were used, at least in continental Europe. Like you would make verjuice with the unripe grapes. You would make sapa, the frutum, you want to call it whatever, but basically it's a reduced must, right? And you would use it as a so I don't know if I assume that probably that wasn't the case in Anglo-Saxon England, because it depends on on the climate. That's another question I guess I have for you. Maybe I'm piling up too many questions, but what I understand from climatology is that around the 6th century or so, climate throughout continental Europe and the Mediterranean went really awry and went really bad. So I know that grapes were cultivated in Roman times in England, and I do also know that they went back to being cultivated in the High Middle Ages when, again, the climate was warm. But so are we losing? What about in between? Like, were they still cultivated up until then, or?
There's a little short Anglo-Saxon warm period, short 2 centuries, 9th, 10th centuries, and they think that the grape line, I think that's a pretty obvious word, but let me know if it isn't, moved up from Europe into England. So at least in southwestern England and possibly southeastern. West is warmer because you've got the Gulf Stream right there on going by Ireland and then hitting the corner of England down there. So southwest England, maybe, and possibly southeast England, you had some great production, at least physically, they were capable of being produced. And we believe that they were grown. The archaeologists believe that they were grown in England. But then as it started cooling down again in the 11th century, we probably lost the grapes again. And it didn't take until the warming started again in the High Middle Ages, as you said. Post roughly, I think I'm trying to remember, sometime in the 14th century, around the time of the Black Plague, where the temperature started going up again. And there's some evidence to suggest that that might have been a precursor to the Black Plague, but that's a whole other story and a whole other class.
Right. And by the way, I wanted to say it again.
Did that answer your question?
Absolutely, it did. I had another quick question actually, before I say that, I wanted to confirm that wine grapes are far, far more acidic as well. So the perception of the sweetness can be lessened by that. So you were absolutely right about that. I don't want to, but also, sorry.
I was speculating through no basis in real data other than a few bits of experience.
Yeah, no, but it's sorry, I'm just very into wine, so that's why.
No, sorry, this is great. This is wonderful. I want you to teach a course on the history of wine in the modern Middle Ages. That would be just amazing.
I might just do that. Yeah. Okay, that would be interesting.
Please.
The quick question I had was about almond milk, because in the High Middle Ages, as you know, well, actually, I guess late Middle Ages is when we start to have extensive cookbooks from Western Europe, and they love almond milk. It's just all over the place. Now, I assume that it also would have been an import at that point for Anglo-Saxon England. But is it something that we have any? Right? Is it something that we have any record of? Like, did they use that?
Again, we have no recipes. Nothing written documentation. As you pointed out, it's an import. On the other hand, I know one reason why almond milk was so popular was that you could drink milk during a fast.
Oh, right. Good point.
So if you had a wealthy monastery, I could see them importing almonds and simmering them and getting the peels off and grinding them down and cooking them again and pouring off the liquid. And look, we can have milk during Easter or whatever it is that we're fasting from. To me, that's still cheating, but maybe I'm too much of a purist.
But do you know if they had the almonds, at least, if they consumed almonds?
No, we know that. Okay, let me look that up because I have quit trying to memorize everything that was possible. Okay, the types of nuts they had available in England were acorn. This says almond, but almonds couldn't possibly be growing in England, so I'm going to move that to an import. So yes, the answer is we do have evidence of almonds in England, but clearly not grown in England.
Wonderful. Thank you so much.
Oh no, thank you. And that lets me fix something in my handout because I'm always learning stuff. Any other questions? We got 5 minutes.
Nuts. What kinds of nuts and how widely?
Oh, okay. So my note from Mostly Hagen is acorns, beech, chestnut, hazel, also known as filberts, pine, and walnut. We know the walnuts came from the Romans and several others could have as well. I'd have to look that up. Imported. Yes, almonds definitely imported. Oh, almond oil imported. So yeah, as we know, acorns are inedible. So you have to process them. Basically, you have to grind them and filter them, if I understand it, through water several times, and then cook them, and then they are edible. And there's
one of the classes is on acorns.
Yes.
It's like the next class at this in room 2, right after this one.
Yeah, I suggest if you're the least bit interested in acorns and nuts in general, yeah. Let's see, what else do I want you to think about? Food is symbology. Food is social status. Food is physically necessary, and therefore that tells you what people had to have eaten. And the bone studies tell you whether they were successful at that. But there's so much imagery and information in the study of food to tell you about the culture and what the possibilities of the culture were. I mean, simply the concept that one of the reasons why the Norse invaded versus just picking off the sweet spots on the outside of England was because the soil was better and it was a milder climate and they could grow more stuff. Right? So there had to have been enough of a surplus to interest the Norse to settle. Because if food was a limited property, the Norse would have gone, oh, well, if we come here, we're going to starve. Let's go further south. Let's all move to Sicily. They tried that too. So I find the study of food in any culture, especially the one that I'm most interested, absolutely fascinating. And I told you that I have attached my daily life handout. Probably doesn't have 40 pages of bib, but it certainly has 20. I'd have to count. Any other questions? Comments? How'd the class do? Did you have fun? Did you enjoy yourself?
Awesome. Awesome. Thank you so much.
Thank you. You're too kind.
Thank you.
And
Now
you
go ahead
can-
and stop the recording.